have a physical quorum in the room, so we'll wait on that unless someone comes in. But we have some interesting speakers today. Bike Walk Alliance, Jeff Rogers from Bike Walk Alliance to talk about their legislative priorities and some information about Bike Walk Alliance. Scott Vogel from the Rockingham Planning Commission is going to talk about the East Coast Greenway and some segments that are over there that he's been working on for quite a while and made some amazing progress. And Rich Westhoff from Friends of the Souhegan River Valley Rail Trail talk about a corridor study that was done out there. So we'll get to that in a moment. First, want to do a round of introductions, and we'll start with Jeff. We'll start here in the room, and then we'll go out to Zoom land. So
cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Rogers. Live in Manchester. Previously lived in Nashville for quite a while. Lovely city. When I get up, I'll tell you some more about what Bike Walk Alliance is working on today.
Dan Hudson, city engineer for Nashville.
Been traffic, Nashville.
Sam Durfee, planning manager, Nashville.
Jaden Carr, NRPC. David Prether, Town of Merrimack.
Nicole Crawford, Town of Milford.
Ben Crosby, Town of Mount Vernon. Eric Lozick, Town of Amherst.
Will Lute, Amherst.
Salem Quinn, NRPC.
we'll go to the back. Cassie.
Kathy Cashin, NRPC. Emma Rarick, NRPC.
All right, I'll read off some names as I see them on the screen. Hi, Wendy Hunt.
Wendy Hunt, Greater Nashua Chamber. Hello to my Amherst friends. I live in Amherst.
Gail Correa.
Good afternoon, Camille Correa, Nashua Transit System. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Marina.
Thanks. I'm Marina Vaz. I'm an environmental justice advocate based here in Nashua with Conservation Law Foundation.
Thanks, Marina. Rich Westhoff.
Yes, so I'm Rich Westhoff. I currently live in Laconia, New Hampshire, but prior to that, I lived since 2000 until about 2022 in Hudson, New Hampshire, and that's when I got involved with the Friends of the Souhegan Valley Rail Trail, and when Chris Buchanan had to leave, I was kind of drafted into the president position in that organization.
Thanks, Rich. We're going to circle back when you are set to speak. We're going to have to fix your volume somehow, but we'll figure that out then.
Is it too low
Colin.
or too high?
Hello,
Colin
Colin.
Lentz, Stratford Regional Planning Commission.
Thanks, Colin. Nick.
Nick Germain, Town Administrator, Walton.
Scott Vogel.
Hi, I'm Scott Bogle. I'm a transportation planner with Rockingham Planning Commission.
Thanks, Scott. Mark Chamberlain.
Hi, Mark Chamberlain, Town of Lembro.
William.
Hey, good afternoon. William Rose with DOT.
Thanks, William. And Mac.
Mac Pavir, Grants Coordinator at NHDES.
Thanks, Mac. And Tyrell.
Hi, Tyrell Borowitz here of NRPC.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to cue up Jeff's presentation, and I'll just let you introduce yourself more thoroughly and talk about that. Let me share this first.
And I come grab the clicker.
Oh, let me get that. Second.
All right.
I think everybody can see that.
Let's make sure this works. Yes, it does. Okay, as I said, I'm Jeff Rogers. I live in Manchester today. From 1990 to 2006, I lived in Nashua. Spent some time at Clock Tower Place on the river. Love that place. I used to enjoy walking a few blocks to get a sandwich from the Nashua Garden. Ah, those were so great. And downtown's very different today. Currently, I serve on the board of directors of Bike Walk Alliance, and I'm here to talk today about our legislative priorities. Appreciate you having us here today and appreciate your time and interest. From For a little background on Bike Walk Alliance, this slide is quite literally a screenshot of our website. My only addition was to add the URL at the top near the yellow arrow. Our focus is on making New Hampshire safer for cycling and walking. And that includes running, skating, using scooters, wheelchairs, any other mobility devices. You should not have to be surrounded by a multi-ton metal cage to be safe on our roads and streets. Now, in particular, we focus on the three areas shown here: policy, infrastructure, and education. And today, I'm going to speak mostly about our focus on policy, specifically on legislation. But we do have some activities in the other areas also. Our focus on policy is important because safe roads for cycling and walking don't appear out of nowhere as if by magic. They require planning and prioritization at the local, regional, and state level. And here are some of the people in the Bike Walk Alliance that help make these things happen. Again, with slides taken directly from our website. Amanda Gorg is our executive director. She was previously a state representative. She brings that knowledge and experience to help with our mission. Amanda lives near the seacoast. And here's a name that I'm going to guess that many of you recognize, Dave Topham. He was our founder. He's been involved in cycling since 1971, founded Bike Walk Alliance in 2006. He lives in Salem and is currently active in 7 organizations focused on cycling or trails or adjacent matters. So if anything, anywhere in the state connects with cycling, Dave is usually aware of it. And Paul Suska is the president of our board. He's retired from a career at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, lives in Goffstown, and frequently rides a recumbent bicycle. And before I go further, I want to make sure that we're clear on an acronym, VRU, which stands for Vulnerable Road User. I was putting this slide together and I'm surprised when I realized, wow, there's really that many categories? I guess there are. And yet, there are some that are missing from this slide. Can anyone name a category that's not on this slide?
Motorized bikes.
There you go. That's a good one. And here's a few others. Arguably the most important is on the right. Let's see. Now we can talk a little bit about history of Bike Walk Alliance and our involvement with legislation in the state, starting all the way back in 2009, when we were instrumental in helping pass the law requiring 3 feet of space to pass a cyclist on the road. In 2014, we supported a VRU bill to increase awareness of the dangers faced by vulnerable road users. While the bill was alive in the legislature for nearly a year, ultimately it was classified as recommended for future legislation, and since then has seen no further action. In 2015, we supported a rails trail study bill, which passed and was signed into law. The bill required the DOT to update the state trails plan. It also established a committee to study and recommend further legislation regarding rail trails. The resulting 40-page report recommended an economic impact analysis of rail trail usage throughout the state. In 2017, we supported House Bill 1731, which we believed greatly improved bicycle safety across the state. It amended 3 other existing RSAs to effectively accomplish the 3 sub-bullets you see there on the bottom half of the slide. Arguably, the most important one is the bottom. Cyclists can now legally use flashing lights, which greatly increases visibility, especially if you've got a bright taillight flashing in daylight. Love that. That bill passed unanimously. Next slide. Let's see. And in 2018, we helped write a bill which ultimately became law in 2019, clarifying the definition of e-bikes and also clarifying the rules for e-bike usage on roads, trails, etc. Public education efforts continue. Given the recent explosion of high-powered and often risky products sold under the general umbrella term e-bike, this bill is due for updating. In 2019, we supported Senate Bill 185, directing the DOT to create a plan for the state's rail trail system. This plan aims to ensure the preservation and integrity of the state's rail corridors, which are owned by the state and used for biking and other forms of non-motorized recreation. The plan also seeks to maximize the return on investment from these assets and engage towns, cities, and private rail trail organizations in the development process. So that's stuff we've done in the past. Now we can talk about what we're working on today. The general legislative focus of the Bike Walk Alliance is on slowing traffic where motor vehicles share the road with vulnerable road users. So I'll talk about several bills that are working their way through the process today. Right now we have two bills that both tackle dangerous high-speed drivers using modern technology. One bill is sponsored by Representative Pat Long from Manchester, and one bill is sponsored by Senator Denise Ricciardi of Bedford, who chairs the Transportation Committee. Now, the bills have some different wording, but they both allow convicted repeat speeding offenders to choose an alternative to license suspension. That alternative would be having an intelligent speeding assistance device, sometimes called an ISA device, installed on their vehicle at their own expense. This device uses GPS technology to monitor the vehicle's location and speed and prevents the vehicle from exceeding the speed limit. These devices are already in use today in commercial fleets where they have been proven effective. So this option, should the convicted offender choose it, would allow them to continue to have effective transportation, but would prevent them from speeding, rendering roads and communities safer for the rest of us. We expect that these two bills will be massaged so that their wording is more similar as time goes on. Those two bills are supported by a nationwide organization called Families for Safe Streets. This organization was founded by Amy Cohen in New York City after her son Sammy was killed by a speeding van right in front of their house in 2013. Now, at Bike Walk Alliance, we're also working with Senator Ricciardi on a bill to let communities lower their speed limits. As some background, in New Hampshire today, the minimum speed limit is not set by your community, it is set by the state. And here are three laws governing.
Sorry, I didn't notice that when I looked at that.
I didn't realize it would be so tiny. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll read it and you guys can trust me. So I want to mention three laws that govern speed limits in the state. RSA 26560 sets the speed limit to 30 miles per hour in a business or urban residence district with lower speeds near schools. So that's 30 miles per hour. RSA 26563 allows towns to alter that speed limit, but they cannot go lower than 25 miles per hour. And before they do that, they're required to do a traffic engineering study, which can be expensive. And finally, the third law involved 26562. It allows a seasonal adjustment of the speed limit. And again, it cannot go lower than 20 miles per hour. It can only happen once per year for a maximum of 4 months. That law is, of course, aimed at towns with a large seasonal tourist influx. Now, the takeaway from all that is that if for some reason your community is not comfortable with 25 miles per hour, maybe you want to go slower, like 20, you can't legally do that today. Now, there are some signs posted that say 20. There are some streets in Portsmouth right now with signs that say 20. Those are not legally enforceable in court. So what we would like to do, I think the next slide shows it, yeah. So we have proposed to Senator Ricciardi, and she put this into a bill. Senate Bill 559, this would take that, that lower speed limit, that minimum speed limit of 25 miles per hour and lower it down to 20. Now, if that were to pass magically tonight and become law in the morning, it wouldn't magically change anything in the state. It would merely allow your town, if you chose to do so, to lower the speed limit to 20. It would just change that minimum. That, some people, of course, would continue to speed. but that would influence a lot of people. So the aggregate or average speed would be lowered, and I think that would reduce the number and severity of traffic-related injuries across the state. As I mentioned, Senator Ricciardi introduced the bill, and it currently has 13 sponsors, 10 senators, and 3 representatives drawn from both sides of the aisle. So we're feeling optimistic that this may become law soon. So another item we're looking at, sorry, I didn't realize that this would happen. Another area we're watching is legislation around e-bikes, and there's currently 3 relative bills. Let me see if I can pull this up. There are 3 bills related to e-bikes underway right now, and in particular, one of the things that's happening these days is there's this giant influx of new e-bikes. Many of them way more powerful than they used to be, and of course they're aimed at making profits by selling to youth who want something fast and fun, right? But many of them are actually just plain dangerous. So we believe that the existing e-bike categories need to be well publicized. There are 3 classes based on the power of the motor and the speed it can attain, and whether the bike has a throttle or not. Some of the newer so-called e-bikes are more like electric motorcycles than they are bicycles. And we think the clarity needs to be explained and enforced in a way that can be managed properly by law enforcement, which can be tough if one of your main categories depends on, say, wattage of the motor. How does a policeman measure the wattage of an e-bike, right? Let's see what our next slide is here. Okay. In a recent example of the danger that can come with e-bikes, the young woman you see here, Amelia Stafford, this is an example from California. She was 15 years old when a friend invited her for a short ride on the bike of his new e-bike. She hopped on the back, and a sudden burst of speed caused her to fall off the back of the bike. Her head hit the pavement, which led to a severely fractured skull. She had bleeding between her skull and her brain, which required emergency surgery, then an induced coma, then replacement of the side of her skull with a plate that you can see here. In the photo at the right, we see a post-recovery Amelia holding a model of her skull and the plate that we used to replace the side of it. Less than 1 year after her accident, Amelia traveled to Sacramento and was able to testify before the state Senate's Transportation Committee that her accident showed how dangerous a Class 2 e-bike can be. A Class 2 e-bike is one that can be powered by a throttle. The state of California passed Assembly Bill 1778, the Marin Electric Bicycle Safety Pilot Program, after her testimony, and then similar legislation has followed that. And another recent wrinkle is now we find that rail trails are under attack in Washington, D.C. The QR code on the right will take you to a web page with some suggested wording for writing to your elected representative, which unfortunately is probably the most effective action you can take right now. In the photo at left is Representative Sam Graves, Republican from Missouri. He chairs the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. There are few people in Washington today who hold as much influence over funding and policy for trails, biking, and walking as the chairman of that committee. In November, he told a reporter, quote, "We're not going to be spending money on murals or train stations or bike paths or walking paths," unquote. Now, Congress's next version of the Surface Transportation Law, which directs this funding, will probably be introduced in 2026. So it's important that we make Congress aware that many Americans actually do support rail trails, multi-use rail trails, and the necessary funding. And that pretty much wraps things up. Happy to entertain any questions, have any discussion, or hear any feedback you may have for me. Go ahead.
Is there any move either in your organization or at the state level to register e-bikes? Because there's just going to be more and more of them.
Yeah.
In the future and faster. And
what we have in place today is that if you have a class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike today, you do not have to get any special registration. But there is definitely a movement to amend the law to account for these higher powered and faster machines, which often are called e-bikes. And I'm not aware of a specific directive to require registration, but I can easily imagine how that would be an appropriate thing to do. Just like you can't hop on a motorcycle with no registration, no insurance, et cetera. And if these devices are above a certain power level, it's only reasonable that they should be, right? We can certainly initiate some conversations along those lines.
maybe registering or licensing would be a better word.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, especially in the big cities. I mean, we could have in New York City and
we see
they're all over the place and
they're crazy.
Yeah.
In fact, I've heard of a few recent incidents involving pedestrians being hit by an e-bike and then killed as a result. And kind of a bad situation.
I do want to, Marina has her hand up before we get to the other questions here. So Marina.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jeff, for this great presentation. My question, it sounds like a lot of the focus of the legislative efforts of Bike Walk Alliance are going to focus on speeding and particularly like setting, giving communities the freedom to regulate the speeds and the speed limits. I had a question about if Bike Walk Alliance is looking at either on the legislative front or maybe on one of the other fronts that you guys work on, solutions that are more centered around infrastructure, road design. I'm just curious
Yes.
if y'all are thinking about that also.
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of discussions will quickly move in the direction of road design because that's generally considered the most effective way to control speeds. Unfortunately, it also takes more money and more time. If as Nashua has done, they've changed the design of Main Street here in some ways that look like they would control speeds better than they formerly did when it was just one unbroken median down the road. But yes, we often come to road design and frequently money and time are factors, therefore we fall back to other approaches.
Thank you.
I guess another issue, or I don't know if it's a question, but is related to courts. Like we're told by our local PD if they have to go to court on a speeding action, like the court will throw it out unless it's 15 miles an hour over. So we're a lot of places in the community are asking us to lower speed limits, probably even below what people really think is reasonable to try to get it under a threshold that then they can enforce and
that's a pretty fat amount of padding. 15 miles per hour.
Especially in an urban environment. Like maybe should be different scales for speeding in an urban environment, different penalties, higher penalties versus going down the highway or something. I don't know, but that's an issue that we see that is driving a lot of requests for reduction in speed limits.
Yeah, I'm hardly in a position to question the judge, but naturally occurs to me, what's the magic about the limit and then 15 over that? Why that amount, right?
Thank you for the presentation, really great. Just had one quick question about, you referenced 3 bills that are currently being proposed for e-bikes. Could you just mention or reference what the name
Yeah.
of those bills?
I sure can. Unfortunately, it was too.
I couldn't see it, yeah.
Yeah, it was way too small to read, but I have the slide deck on my phone. I'll just find it. I'll tell you what, I'll find it and give it to you. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
I know just sort of a comment that at our last policy meeting here, our commissioners we talked about safety targets, with respect to motor vehicle crashes and, bike at individuals. But it was a bit topic of interest, definitely raised it was a lively conversation. There were questions about e-bikes. So, just to comment that I think there's a lot of support for at least discussion about.
Certainly in Manchester, in the last couple of years, I feel like there's also a kind of an explosion of scooters. Are you seeing that here too?
Yeah, and we are seeing more of the level, I guess it's the level 3s, but they're going up to 28 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So the biggest issue that I think that we see is, are they appropriate in a bike lane? Are they appropriate on our rail trails?
Yeah.
And they're certainly not on the sidewalks, but we're seeing them on sidewalks as well. I think the fatality that we just had in Massachusetts was a sidewalk.
Yeah, one other quick question. Is there an age limit or an age that you can start to use an e-bike, or could a 5-year-old ride it? Could a 7, a teenager?
Best of my knowledge here in New Hampshire today, there is no age limit. However, that is being introduced in many other locations. And I believe some of the legislation in California following the accident that I showed a slide about does include a lower age limit of 16. And I believe there's also some helmet requirements. So, yeah.
Scott, question.
On that age limit, my understanding is that under the current RSAs, you need to be at least 16 to operate a class 3 e-bike that tops out at 28 miles an hour. Class 1 and 2 top out at 20. And then there is the helmet requirement, as was referenced. If you're under 16, have to wear a helmet on a class 1 or class 2 e-bike.
I have to wonder if a policeman is involved in any situation, how is he going to know the class of the bicycle?
Now, interestingly, what we've learned, there have been, I think, 1 serious injury, 1 fatality in Hampton in the last year. I think 1 on an e-bike, 1 on an electric scooter. And Hampton police actually went to the middle school and possibly the high school as well and locked up any class 3 e-bikes and required students, in order to retrieve their e-bike, to show proof of age. I can try to get details on that for you, but that's what we've heard from some trail advocates in Hampton. So it's an interesting approach. I don't know how many other police departments are actually actively trying to enforce that age limit.
Rich?
Can you hear me okay?
Not really, but.
No.
Is the volume too loud or too quiet?
You're quiet.
It's too quiet.
Is that better? Have I changed it at all?
Hold on, I'll turn this up over here, but we'll need to remember to turn it down if anybody else.
Sorry about that.
So, give it a try, Rich.
All right, my question again is about registering e-bikes. And I don't see why registration should be limited to like out of class or class 3 e-bikes. I mean, these things use energy from the grid. They are not just a human powered device. And so, and they cost, thousands of dollars. So why not just go ahead and do the registration? It also answers the question for the police, what class is this bicycle? Because the registration has to be on the e-bike. And that way you can tell. I mean, these things cost a lot of money. Why not? What's the barrier to registering them?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I know that in New Hampshire, sometimes you get opposition to almost any kind of new governmental regulations, which is about the only thing I can think of as a possible explanation.
So one thing that may or may not be encouraging, because we're, we work with our federal highways and we hear from them, fairly frequently and get memos from the secretary and such. They do seem to be focusing on its safety.
Good.
So perhaps, the future legislation will at least be funding and be interested in safety projects, which may be encouraging. See when that new legislation comes around. So, all right. Any other questions for Jeff?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'll get that slide.
All right. So we'll move on to Scott Vogel is going to talk about the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway and progress and challenges he's encountered. And Scott, you can go ahead. I guess share your screen, right? Oops, hold on, I'm going to turn you up and you're muted.
That would help if you could actually hear me. All right, and sharing screen. All right, are you all able to see that?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, well, thanks, Matt and all, for the opportunity to talk with you for a few minutes here about progress with the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway. This is a project that Rockingham Planning Commission has been working on for over 15 years with 7 corridor communities and New Hampshire DOT, Chambers of Commerce, the National East Coast Greenway Alliance, new regional nonprofit group, the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Alliance, that was established several years ago. We've had technical assistance from the National Park Service and from neighboring trail groups in southern Maine and northern Massachusetts. So it's been a big year for us in terms of getting the first 8 miles of the trail open in the fall of 2024. And there's another 1.6 miles that's in construction currently. We had a curveball in late summer learning about some delays in 2 remaining phases of the project in the draft tenure plan, but we're feeling cautiously optimistic that we've made some progress in hopefully getting at least one of those back into the plan. And I'll say a bit more about that in a bit. Cool. So the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway is New Hampshire's section of the East Coast Greenway that some or hopefully many of you are familiar with that name. The East Coast Greenway is envisioned to be a non-motorized, traffic-separated, multi-use path extending close to 3,000 miles from the Canadian border up in Calais, Maine, all the way down to Key West and connecting big cities and small towns and natural areas up and down the eastern seaboard. And so there are photos here from the northernmost section of the East Coast Greenway, the Down East Sunrise Trail in Maine, and then the Florida Keys Overseas Heritage Trail down in Florida. Here's a look at the alignment of the East Coast Greenway as it comes up from New York through New England. Currently, there are just shy of 330 miles of the trail that have been completed off-road, just under 200 miles that are in the pipeline. And in the pipeline means that alignment has been identified, funds have been programmed, and it's in some state of engineering but not yet completed. Another 58 miles where the alignment has been identified, but the funding hasn't been assembled, and then 169 miles that are considered gap, where it's not yet clear where the eventual off-road alignment is. East Coast Greenway Alliance maintains a cue sheet for anybody who wants to ride the whole distance, and so those gap miles are just on road at present. So the Greenway in New Hampshire has been programmed out into 4 stages. The first of those, phase 1A, extends from Portsmouth down to the Hampton-Northampton town line, is 8 miles. And New Hampshire DOT and their contractor did a beautiful job getting that built in 2024. That opened in September 2024. Phase 1B is under construction right now, and I'll show you a couple of photos of that. That's 1.6 miles that goes down through the center of Hampton. And then we have 2 remaining phases. Phase 2 in Seabrook, that's 2.4 miles. That's in the 10-year plan for engineering starting in 2027 and construction in 2030. And then phase 3, that's in the southern part of Hampton and Hampton Falls through Hampton Marsh. And that is also in the 10-year plan for engineering beginning in 2027, construction in 2032. And when I say the 10-year plan here, I mean the current adopted one, not the draft. Last year, we were able to secure a RAISE grant to accelerate the engineering for the Marsh section, although with changing priorities in DC, we're still trying to get that grant obligated. So there was a ribbon cutting, had a big celebratory opening of that first 8 miles in September of 2024. Then Governor Sununu came and spoke at that. We had the executive director of the East Coast Greenway Alliance, who came up from North Carolina. Commissioner Cass is there in the green ball cap on the left side. I think we had 180 people show up, and the Department of Transportation, I think, was surprised at the level of public interest in this. So here's a map that you can see of the currently open section with the green line there. Right now, there are 3 trailhead access points with parking. The northernmost of those 3 blue dots is at the skate park in Portsmouth. There's also a trailhead with parking at the Hampton-Northampton town line. DOT has made available a portion of one of their maintenance yards where there are about 30 parking spaces. And then you see a blue dot in the middle, and that's Breakfast Hill Road in Greenland, where there are, I think, 4 spaces on either side of the highway. And then the yellow line at the bottom is phase 1B that's in construction right now, heading down through the center of Hampton. So we've seen steady growth in trail usage since the trail opened. We had an eco counter, automated bike ped user counter, out just south of the skate park in Portsmouth from late May to mid-August, and saw average weekday use of 376 trips across those weeks, average weekend day use of 617 trips, and a peak day of Memorial Day Monday where it was over 1,000 trips. Particularly the weekend trips increased steadily through the summer. I think by August, we are up close to 700 trips per day. I think it was 690 or so average weekend day use. A next step for us, we recently got a grant through a private donor to put some permanent trail user counters out there. And we want to have one in this location, but also ones in Hampton and Northampton. We'll need to do some trail user surveying to get a sense for how far people are typically traveling when they use the trail, so we can figure out how to knit together those counts and get an estimate of total usage without duplicating users across those different count sites. We've gotten some of the signage out onto the trail that we want to see. The National Park Service, through our technical assistance grant with them, produced a beautiful signage plan for us. We worked with the municipalities and developed a set of trail rules, and trail rule signs are out. We have mileage markers every 1/10 of a mile that have been installed, have signs at the town lines. There are kiosks at the two major trailheads, and there's a Eagle Scout who's working to install a third one at Breakfast Hill Road. In the coming year, we're looking to get signage at the road crossings so that trail users know where they are in terms of the road network, and then start working on wayfinding signage and interpretive signage. Here's how we're also working on an Adopt a Trail program. We've been working with the Department of Transportation and the municipalities to get the okays in place for the nonprofit to sell Adopt a Trail sponsorships. And in return for what we think will be $250 a year, a business or family sponsor would get a placard on one of those mileage markers acknowledging their contribution. And this idea was, we've lifted it from the Coastal Trails Coalition down in Salisbury and Newburyport. And by doing this, they managed to raise most of the money that they need for trail maintenance through the year, and also adding amenities like benches. We had a great trail volunteer day last spring, and there have been a number of other corporate volunteer days that have happened through the summer and early fall. That said, we're still trying to build out a more structured volunteer program. And in the meantime, the nonprofit trail group has a maintenance contract with a private contractor to do mowing and clearing of culverts and so forth. Our hope is that as we get a volunteer program structured, we can have volunteers doing more of that. But until the volunteer program is really up and running and healthy, we're contracting some of it out. Here are some images of the new section of trail that's under construction now. This is looking south into Hampton from the Northampton town line. And you can see that just prior to the snowfall, this was a couple of weeks ago, they had the base material down. This is looking north from Hampton Depot Square, so in the center of Hampton. You can see that Bogey's Bar and Grill here is well situated for drawing trail users off the trail for a bite to eat. And then this is looking north from Drakeside Road, which is the southern terminus of the trail. There had been a bridge over Drakeside Road. Historically, the town had removed the span and the abutments because the spans kept getting hit by trucks. Eventually, we would like to restore a separated grade here, but for the time being, they have sloped this back so it meets ADA requirements. You can see the grade difference on the south side of the road. So I mentioned the RAISE grant earlier. This was to do both the preliminary design and final engineering for a 2.4 mile section in the southern part of Hampton and Hampton Falls. About 1.8 miles of that goes through Hampton Marsh. There's an old rail causeway that had been built by Boston and Maine Railroad in the 19th century. And you can see here some information on what's there on that causeway. The red circles are 3 historic railroad bridges, all of which were undersized. So you can see that there's considerable scour on either side as the tidewaters try to pass through those narrow openings on each side. Because of those constricted openings, there are also a number of washout areas that are circled in yellow there. And so in 2016, 2017, there was a team from UNH Engineering Department that came up with a conceptual design for this. And that conceptual design was subsequently reviewed by an engineering firm here in Hampton and also by DOT, and became the basis for putting this project into the 10-year plan. But the idea with the RAISE grant was to accelerate the engineering for that and also try to bring in some nationally competitive money, some new money into the state to offset the cost of that project to DOT. So the purpose and need here for this was to create a safe active transportation alternative to US 1 You can see US 1 in the upper left of that image, which is really a high stress, high speed, high volume, high stress route for anybody to try to walk along or to ride a bike along. Rehabilitating that state-owned transportation corridor, the old rail causeway, which has really fallen into disrepair. Also redesigning the causeway to improve tidal flow, and then accelerate the completion of the greenway, not just as a safe transportation corridor and a linear park, but also as an economic catalyst for the region. So the design concept for the causeway is to further open out those 3 washout areas and span those with boardwalk, and then elevate the remaining segments of the causeway between 2 and 3 feet for resiliency to projected sea level rise and increasing coastal storms. I mentioned up front the curveball with the 10-year plan. DOT realized this summer that the 10-year plan was overprogrammed by $400 million and needed to figure out a way to bring that into financial constraint. A number of projects were removed from the 10-year plan, and a few others were maintained in the 10-year plan, but components of them delayed. And so the draft 10-year plan maintains the engineering phases for phase 2 and 3 in Seabrook and through Hampton Marsh, but delays construction beyond 2036. So DOT's, as I'm sure you've talked about at your TTAC, really in an untenable position where the legislature hasn't given them the resources that they need to maintain and modernize the state's transportation system. That said, the nonprofit New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Alliance did a lot of outreach, and there were a lot of people who turned out to the Gasset hearings in Hampton and Greenland. I think there are more people that spoke about the rail trail at those 2 hearings than about any other project. I think there are 25 people who came to the Gasset hearing in Hampton, of which 10 spoke. In Greenland, I think there are 35 or 40 people, and 20 of them spoke. We're hopeful that that made an impression on DOT staff and especially on Councilor Janet Stevens, and she seems inclined to be supportive and has said she'll, work during this now sort of horse trading phase of the 10-year plan where the executive councilors, determine what projects they may be able to reinsert based on the input from the hearings. So last slide, in terms of next steps for the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Alliance nonprofit and for RPC and the corridor communities, we want to try to get those raise funds obligated and get going with that engineering work, get the Adopt a Trail program in place, and also continue with other private funding development particularly for trail amenities. Continuing to work on trailhead access and connections to adjacent neighborhoods and community facilities. I talked earlier about getting more signage out there and amenities. We've had interest from service organizations in the corridor communities about installing benches and pocket parks. Continue building out the volunteer program, working with Seabrook and Hampton Falls and DOT to get trail agreements in place in advance of the engineering starting for those phases, and then just generally trying to expedite remaining trail segments. So that's what I've got. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Scott. Any questions?
Yeah, one quick one. On the Massachusetts side, does their rail trail come up to the border or is it shy of the border, leading into Newburyport and Plum Island and?
Yeah, very good question. So Massachusetts, the Old Eastern Marsh Trail in Salisbury comes within about 100 yards of the border. And we had worked with the town of Seabrook and Salisbury to get a connector trail built that takes off from the main Old Eastern Marsh Trail, about 100 yards south of the state line. So I think 800 feet of that connector trail are in Salisbury, 800 feet are in Seabrook. The Seabrook Trail group got their Firemen's Association to donate an easement for that trail. And they got some recreational trails program funding for that 800 feet of trail. Similarly, Salisbury got rec trails funding on the Massachusetts side. And that was important because otherwise there wasn't a logical terminus for the trail in Massachusetts at Route 286 at the state line because of the steepness of the slope there. And without that connector trail, they would have had to stop, I think, about a half mile further south. So Massachusetts has committed that as soon as New Hampshire finishes the trail to the state line, that they will come back and construct that remaining 100 yards to get to the state line.
Thank you.
Else? Question here. You mentioned the surprise that came out of the 10-year plan revision. Were there any other surprises, say, at the federal level, either good or bad?
I mean, we were pleasantly surprised when we were awarded the RAISE grant last summer. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that obligated before last January, and then there was kind of a long holding period as the new administration sort of sorted out how they wanted to handle grant agreements for what used to be called RAISE is now called BUILD again under the new administration. There were a couple of different versions of a grant agreement form that we got and had filled out and then found there was something new. We're feeling cautiously optimistic that now with all of the paperwork submitted that it'll get approved in Washington and not nixed. We've heard similar cautious optimism from the New Hampshire Field Office for Federal Highway Administration. And both the New Hampshire Field Office and New Hampshire DOT have been, I'd say, very supportive on this. There's been some in the news about bike ped projects elsewhere in the country having been clawed back that had been awarded RAISE projects. But our understanding is those that were pulled back tended to be on-road projects where there was an argument made that by turning pavement width over to bikes, it was hostile to cars. And in this case, you know, we're working to create an entirely separate facility that would in fact take bikes and pedestrians off of Route 1 and so not create those conflicts. And, you know, also looking not just at a safety project, but at a project that really has what we think is strong economic development potential.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Rich.
I was able to turn my mic up. Is it a little better?
That is better.
It is.
Thank you.
All right, and I can go a little farther too. So is that better?
That's excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Want to
So
move on?
I'm kind of curious about the other end of the trail, about if there is a pathway into Maine. I've looked at it many times on the map and just wondered. So I just thought I'd ask that question.
Yes, there is. Actually, if okay if I share my screen again really briefly?
Sure.
I've got a graphic of how the trail goes through Portsmouth. It's oops. Hold on, let me shift my screens around again to do this. From current slide.
By the way, just a great presentation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. So the city of Portsmouth has been working on exactly this problem for several years now. So on the bottom left, you can see the rail trail alignment itself in green. that comes up as far north as Barbary Lane. Um, but the route into town takes off a couple hundred yards south of there at Eileen Dondero Foley Avenue. And the city has built a side path along Foley, side path along Borthwick Avenue, crosses over the Route 1 bypass. Again, multi-use side path along Hodgton Way through the new West End Yards development. Right now, from the end of the Hodgton Way path, we've established an on-road routing, working with the city that you can see in the kind of gold-colored and green lines there. And then it crosses over into Maine at Memorial Bridge. And back when the department upgraded Memorial Bridge 10, 12 years ago, there was a lot of focus on improving bike ped access across that bridge, in part knowing that it would carry the greenway. But the city of Portsmouth has also committed to building this North Mill Pond path that you see in the dotted red line there. And that's on an old Boston and Maine rail siding that the city purchased. And so that will at least take it off-road as far north as Maplewood Avenue. And then you'll still have a segment that will need to be on-road in order to get to Memorial Bridge.
It looks great. Thank you.
Thanks
All
for
right,
the question.
thanks. So, Rich, I'm gonna share my screen, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
We're gonna move on to Friends of the Souhegan Valley Rail Trail. Rich Westoff is the chair of that group. And they have an aspirational project, I would call it, here in Nashua. And Rich is gonna talk about it. And Rich, we might wanna move through it relatively quickly in the interest of time.
Sure.
Hold on a
Are
second.
you able to hear me okay? I can always turn my volume up a little more.
No, we're good.
You're loud and clear.
All right.
Here we go. So Rich, you
Yeah,
can see that,
so-
right?
I can see it. Yeah, so this is about the corridor study that we did for the Souhegan Valley Rail Trail concept. This is by the Friends of the Souhegan Valley Rail Trail, which I took over as the board chair from Chris Buchanan, who initiated this group, and these members who have been active members since the beginning of this. So next slide. The organization is the Friends of the Souhegan Valley Rail Trail. And it's a 501c3 organization to advocate for a multi-use rail with trail, not replacing the rail line along the Hillsborough rail line from Nashua into Wilton. Some years ago, we raised approximately $30,000 for a preliminary corridor study, which was completed by Sam Fortier of CMA Engineers. And he did, some examination of section by section alternatives for a trail that parallels the rail line, and some portions of it are on and some are off corridor. So next slide. This is an overall map of the route, which covers, from down where the rail line touches the Lowell rail line, which goes north along the Merrimack River. And so through Nashua, cuts a small section of Merrimack through Amherst, Milford, and then into Wilton. So essentially covers through those towns. This is the initiation or the eastern terminus of the trail, where it would be touching on the Lowell rail line there, and the yellow line is the railroad corridor, which is now owned by CSX. And there are a couple trouble spots here. The red circle has a pinch point where the rail line actually goes right between two buildings. So there's not enough room for a rail with trail type of configuration. So there are a couple of alternatives that Sam looked at, which would detour over to Temple Street, or alternatively to leverage the Heritage Rail Trail east section, which is in design, and to essentially follow that down to Spruce Street and go north on Spruce Street to the alternative, to the Temple Street area where it would connect with the railroad corridor. And as a note, the railroad corridor at this point, where there's actually a small pedestrian path that goes from Temple Street to the railroad corridor, and then it actually parallels the line there. So next photo or next picture. Yeah, so this is actually an interesting part in that in fact CSX, whether they know it or not, actually has a section of rail with trail where the pedestrian side path goes and crosses the bridge across this. And this may have been done when it was Boston and Maine or Pan Am. I actually don't know the history well enough to know that. But and then it actually continues through the parking lot. And it there's kind of a baseline rule of being 20 feet for rail with trail to the edge of the trail to the center of the track. That's sort of a state of New Hampshire rule that's recommended. And I haven't gotten out a tape measure, but I'm pretty confident that this trail does not meet that requirement. But there is a fence that separates the two. Next slide. So this is the next section from the Nashua River into downtown. And as I mentioned, there is currently that lavender colored path is an existing path and boardwalk that goes into downtown. There is alternately but that path is pretty narrow and it actually follows through kind of a parking lot. So it's preferred to go to the south side of the path, south side of the parking lot, that yellow dotted line where there's a potential easement, or alternately even actually to stay on the south side of the Nashua River and follow that turquoise colors path to go and meet Main Street there where the end of that line kind of ends is where the proposed crossing of Main Street would be. And that's partly true because of several pinch points that are between buildings where the railroad corridor is actually, very close to buildings on both sides. So next slide. And this is actually, as I mentioned, we're trying to leverage whenever we can existing projects. And so that this is to the west side of Main Street. Main Street's on the right there. So once the trail crosses Main Street, it would have to pass between those two buildings on the rail corridor, but there's a lot of pinch points here. So there are actually already projects that are in progress to continue this boardwalk on the north side of the river. So those are those two kind of brown colored straight sections that are kind of to the left and right and then diagonally down. And then to follow this path, which actually there is a path on the north side of the river there, which meets a pedestrian bridge which crosses the river. So next slide. And they in kind of the lavender color on the bottom there is that path that continues and it meets this cotton transfer bridge. So there would be a task of joining this existing path with back to the rail corridor or to rejoin a region right there where this is the veterans, the new, I guess what was once called the Broad Street Parkway, but now appears to be called the Veterans Memorial Parkway. And there is a bit of a trouble spot right there that's circled in white, where there's a pinch point where a survey would be required to see if there's enough room to be able to fit a path between the railroad and the Veterans Memorial Parkway. And from this point, this actually continues on up then towards the Broad Street crossing. This is a picture of that path which already exists on the north side of the river. And then that's a picture of the pinch point where Veterans Memorial Parkway comes very close to the railroad. And it may be that once you get close to the Veterans Memorial Parkway, that it might be easier to just build this as a side path a separated side path to the parkway. So next slide. This is that railroad corridor continues up there. There's a few bridges that could potentially present some issues. So again, it might be that the Veterans Memorial Parkway could support a side path which is separated. But if you can use the corridor, you would need to straighten out and make this crossing parallel. And as Sam Fortier mentioned that there could be a pedestrian crossing built in here, and that the lights, there could be a option to like press a button to cross, and that could be synchronized with the traffic light, which is already at that Broad Street intersection. Next slide. So from there, this continues up behind some houses. The railroad corridor continues up behind some houses there. And a big challenge here is actually getting across Route 3, the Everett Turnpike. And the bridge, which is there, the rail bridge, has a small, narrow, sort of like a pedestrian maintenance crossing next to the railroad, but it would not support a bike path really. It would have to either be widened. I think Sam suggested, CMA engineers suggested that a separate pedestrian crossing bridge should be built there. And as an alternative, that it could be possible to detour over to Blue Hill Avenue, because there's a way to get through down here to Blue Hill Avenue. And that Blue Hill Avenue has sidewalks on both sides, but that in a bridge, maintenance project, it could be possible to move all that to one side of the bridge and turn those two sidewalks into a bike ped path that would go across on the north side of Blue Hill Avenue and then reconnect with the corridor farther down in that section. Beyond that, this rail corridor from Everett Turnpike to Old Nashua Road, where actually 101A rejoins, it becomes close to the rail corridor again. It is wide enough to support a standard rail with trail configuration on the south side of the corridor, with really mostly just minor crossings of roads. And actually, this would be in some ways if you could use the corridor, it'd be practically the easiest part to build, because but essentially it's a pretty wide corridor. I think it's 80 feet wide, so it actually has enough width on either side to incorporate a rail with trail configuration. So next slide. If continuing on there, I think one could follow that same from Old Nashua Road up to the crossing with Route 122 and 101A. This section is really kind of nice. The previous section is nice because it would get riders and people off of the Route 101A, which is pretty high speed thoroughfare. So there's a couple options here, 2 or 3 options, but perhaps the easiest one is to just cross with the light. There's actually already a traffic light there, and to cross Route 122, and then also cross Route 101A in 2 pieces with traffic lights. So I think next slide. I'm kind of jumping forward here into Milford, because much of that other route is reasonably straightforward. There's some wetlands concerns, but once you get into Milford, there are some more pinch points where from Tonella Road to Route 13 in Milford, there's some narrow sections where the corridor actually is quite close to buildings. And so it was suggested that perhaps one would have to get off of the railroad corridor there and detour down to what looks like Prospect Street and Lincoln Street to make it through those areas. And I think next slide, and I'm just about done with the photos. This is another place where the rail corridor from Route 13 to Union Street in Milford, where there's quite a bit of, well, this is actually a bridge over Great Brook. And so it's probably a lot easier to detour and continue down Lincoln Street and those sort of areas. There's quite a few areas where there's narrow spaces between buildings. So I'm not going to take you all the way to Wilton just in the interest of time and just say that this, there's some challenges. The rail corridor was purchased by CSX from Pan Am, and CSX has upgraded the railroad since purchasing, indicating they intend to use it. So they're not really trying to abandon it. Their policy tends to resist rail with trail. On their website, they say they support rail to trail conversion for rail banking, but that they do not support rail with trail. However, they do have rail with trail on several of their rail lines. So it is possible in some cases. It's not clear whether some of those are rail with trail configurations that they allowed to be built or whether they are ones that they bought from another railroad. And so they sort of inherited them. Efforts to contact CSX are ongoing. I recently received an email address from a CSX real estate personnel, which I actually was able to get an email back from them. So this was really nice because we've been trying for several years without success to contact CSX. And so, so this has some narrow corridor sections that require some alternative routes. I think next slide, and I should be able to wrap up here pretty quick. So possible solutions, we're going to be reaching out to CSX real estate director to discuss this. We'd need barriers between the rail and trail wherever it's near to the rail, and develop alternatives where needed. I live in Laconia, where we actually have one of the largest sections of rail with trail in the state, but it's on a state-owned railroad. But essentially, there's a lot of places where people say that the easiest way to build rail with trail is if you can find an easement off of the rail corridor, which parallels the rail corridor, then you don't necessarily have to deal with the railroad. You can build that if you can get farther off of it. So we'll be looking at alternative routes wherever we can and wherever required. So I think the last slide is just my conclusions that we think this is a unique and challenging, definitely a challenging opportunity to make a valuable active use trail along the Hillsborough corridor. And we're going to have to tackle these challenges in stages and leverage existing plans, especially in Nashua, as much as we can to try and build momentum for the rest of the trail. So I think that's about all I have, and I'm welcome to answer any questions that anyone has.
Rich. Any questions? All right, thank you.
I'll say I can't wait to write it when it's done.
I would love to. I know that there are sections of it now that you can walk, but and legally walk, but it's a little tough to get a bicycle on most of those sections.
Thank you, Rich. That was educational. Really appreciate it.
I know that Scott had been looking to try and reach out to CSX, so I can share that email with you. I was actually very pleasantly surprised to get an email back from CSX because in general, we've not been able to reach out to them and really get any response.
That would be great, Rich. I'd love to I'd love to get that name. I remember being on a webinar and there was a real estate guy from CSX talking about rail banking. I don't know if it's the same
Yeah.
person, but
His first name is Damien. I think Damien Diana, and I'll
okay.
have to. I've got his email. I can forward that to you.
Yeah, we'd love to find a way to connect the eastern end of the Rockham Recreation Trail in Newfields over to the north-south East Coast Greenway.
And I think they're going in position as that they're resistant, but we'll have to see, if we can figure out a way to make them understand that it could be in their interest.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Matt.
Oh, you're welcome, Rich. So other NRPC projects, there are two I did want to mention quickly, and I am going to share my screen, and there's a memo that is here physically in the room. I did not send it out, and it has to do with our with the minor revisions for December, and again, so those in the room can refer to the memo. Those out there in Zoom land can take a look at this, but we did receive, let's see, hold on. Yeah, I have that date up there is wrong, but it is the December minor revisions. And actually, you know what? This is the wrong one. I'm gonna go back and well, I think the folks in Zoom land are gonna have to just listen in, but what I did want to make folks aware that so the December minor revisions, we received them from DOT, and we're required to act on those. They are administrative in nature, and they require no action by the TTAC or a policy committee, but we do want you all to be aware of these. So the projects, there's one project for December in Nashua. It's actually Nashua, Merrimack, and then into Bedford. It's the 13761C Everett Turnpike widening from exit 11 to south of exit 13. And the change is in the construction phase to adjust downward the funding estimate. It's about a 1.8% decrease, so it doesn't rise to the threshold of an amendment, and it has to do with inflation. It's an inflation adjustment. There are several statewide programmatics. One is bridge for tier 3 and 4 bridges. This is maintenance and preservation. They're shifting, the proposed change is to shift preliminary engineering and construction funding around within the TIP years. The next programmatic is the EV infra, which is the electric vehicle infrastructure program. Proposed changes are shifting and decreasing engineering funds, increasing construction funds, and then combining so-called other funds and construction funds. So those are the proposed changes. The Highway Safety Improvement Program is getting an adjustment, and that proposed change is to increase PE and right-of-way funds and decrease construction funds. And then the final programmatic is the pavement for tier 2 highways, pavement and resurfacing of tier 2 highways, and that change is to increase construction funds, and that change is to actually increase the New Hampshire DOT or state of New Hampshire contribution in 2026. So those are all on that hard copy of the memo that people can see here, and if anybody out that's zoomed in, I'm happy to send that out if you want to take a look at that. So any questions about the minor revisions for December? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about as far as NRPC projects is I think most of you are aware is that we are in the midst of our RFQ process for an on-call engineer. Where we are in that process is the engineer, any questions about the RFQ were due this past Friday. We didn't receive any. We're going to send out a reminder later this week, just to make sure we're capturing anybody that might have missed it. Or missed our previous notification. The deadline for proposals is, I believe it's December 19th, Friday the 19th. And then we'll make a decision by January 16th. And so we do have a request. We need one more member of the TTAC to volunteer to score and rank our projects. I think Will and Ben from Hudson have volunteered, so.
Is that gonna happen in early January? If they come in the 19th, that's right around the holidays.
Yeah.
I mean, is that what the plan is?
Yeah, there's time built in there.
Yep.
There's plenty of time. These aren't too tough to review, so. So we are throwing it out there. We're looking for another volunteer, and we'll. I'm sorry.
We can do it.
Oh, thanks.
Can I volunteer? Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be great. So that gives us 3 TTAC members, 2 staff members, and appreciate that. Thank you. So that's what I have for NRPC projects. Are there any municipalities that want to weigh in on any projects they've got going? Well,
Yeah, I just wanna, about a month or a week or so ago, we got a email from Salem about the Build Grant Program. And then I turned that around to ask you and Jay to forward that to whoever is the lead on the the rail program from Massachusetts border. Did you do that? I mean, I'm just curious. It sounds like that's right in the alley of finding funds for that.
Not really.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but funding for the rail project would come from different funds, from FTA and FRA funds, mainly FTA. So rail funding projects are a different pot of money.
So, yeah, okay. FTA, is that a?
Also, we
DOT?
could, the build grants, we could never get, Federal Transit Administration. Yeah, it's federal. Also, the dollar amounts that we'd be looking at are really much higher than what you'd see with regular.
But I think there's an initial study that was going to try to get funded, right? Or at least a corridor study. I keep pushing for that anyway. So, okay. Sounds good, thanks.
so let's see, anybody in Zoom land? Marina, any comments, anything you want to talk about? All right, thank you.
No updates from me. Thanks all.
Great, thank you. Wendy? I think Wendy's okay. So, Mac, what's going on at New Hampshire DES?
So we currently have, as of right now, 5 million still available for Granite State Clean Fleets, and still 315,000 for New Hampshire Clean Diesel. So I do highly suggest that any public entities apply. We are still receiving applications on a rolling basis, and if anybody has any questions, I highly encourage people to reach out, because a lot of people get confused about the 2 programs. I also wanted to point out that there are public schools are also able to apply as well, as long as the school bus is owned by the school and not a private entity. I get a lot of questions about that. So I figured I'd just point that out because it's been a question I've been getting a lot recently. So we also have a new RFI out, a request for information out. We have about $3 million that currently is in the pockets of the state under the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. So basically under the VW Trust, there are different funds that are allocated to different things. So one of them is, of course, replacing diesel units. The other one is for EV level 2 infrastructure. Now, we have not opened a program for this $3 million as of yet. So the RFI is essentially requesting information or suggestions on how this program could occur if we were to open up a level 2 charging station rebate program. So I can drop that link in the chat. We are just requesting any feedback from anybody who's interested. You can just drop us an email. So I will send you that flyer in the chat as well. That is it for now.
Thank you, Mac. William, any comments?
No updates beyond what you've already talked about today.
Thank you, William. Camille, anything from NTS?
The newest update that we have is we received word from Lowell that they received the interconnectivity grant. So they're going to start to work on a route from Lowell to southern Nashua, back to Lowell, Monday through Friday. So I'll keep you posted on those next steps and bring you in on the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How can Massachusetts get funding in New Hampshire not?
They have a grant called interconnectivity to connect between states, not intra, but inter. And they applied for one. There was also one awarded for the southern area as well. So they awarded 2 different grants for interconnectivity from Massachusetts into New Hampshire. And we'll have a little bit more information after those routes are solidified and developed. And we look forward to the partnership and the next steps. So keep you posted.
And Camille, do you know, is that going to Pheasant Land Mall?
As far as I know, that is one anticipated stop, and so is Market Basket, just for people to be able to access, and it'll be coming up through Tinsboro and starting in Lowell, so people have access to many different locations that they didn't have before. And Lowell has some ideas as to where that route is going to go, and they're going to put it in a mapping format for us so that we're able to provide that information to everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, maybe they could stop at Costco.
Costco.
Yeah.
This is in addition to the route that goes of 3A and accesses around the golf course area. So this is an additional route.
All right, thanks, Camille. So are there any other comments or questions or things to talk about? Any other updates? And shall we adjourn by consensus?
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
You guys, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Matt.
I'll be in touch with you, Matt. I haven't forgotten.